This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And if you've listened to our other podcasts, you'll understand that we're all on a journey. And sometimes we plan that journey and it just doesn't go the way we wanted it to go. Sometimes we realize we have to make changes and we don't know how to make those changes because we're stuck in our old habits. Today, my guest is Kevin Cahill, and Kevin has a phenomenal website, which I will put in the show notes. Kevin talks about change and helping people get through the changes of everyday life. So welcome, Kevin, and give us a little bit of background. How did you get into this and why?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me onto your platform. It's an absolute honor to be here with you today, speaking about what is my favorite topic, and that's change. How did I get here? You know, without having to go back 40 some odd years and take you step by step, life is such a journey. I somewhat fell into this role right now where I'm focusing on change. Like everyone on this earth, I've had so many challenges and trials and tribulations. And there came a point where in my own darkness, in my own depths, I was writing and I realized there was a pattern to my writing. I realized there was also a pattern to my own journey. And when I continued to develop my writing and continue to develop what I was experiencing and what I was noticing, I realized that that pattern that I was experiencing was very much in line with the seasonality of the nature and the world around us. And you and I in the Northern Hemisphere were very lucky where we have 3-4 very distinct seasons. They're a little bit different than they were back in the day, but spring, summer, sure enough, there comes fall, and now we're in the winter.
Right.
My favorite season of the year because it is so symbolic. And I realized that everything that I had gone through over my life, various losses and challenges, there was a pattern to it, almost a cadence to it. And I came to realize that all change, regardless of how big that change is, whether it's good or whether it's bad, we all live in this pattern where there's 4 questions that truly circumambulate every single system of life, whether it is plant, animal, human. We always go through that first question is, how do you prepare for change? And for most of us, that's our first 20 some odd years on this earth where we're given all of those tools of how do you prepare for change. And we're about to get into winter right now in our area where you are and where I am. And that is this we just came through fall, and fall teaches us that we are about to go through change. We are about to go through darkness. We are about to go through some really hard times. And the universe is telling us to get prepared, to be ready for it. And then the second question is, how do you go through suffering? And this is one element that we never learn, no matter what school, college, university, book you read. No one out there is talking about how do you go through suffering? How do you go through the proverbial dark night of the soul or Joseph Campbell's hero journey, right? We're always at some point in our life, we're going to be face down in the gutters of life. We're going to be in the winter of discontentment. We're going to be in that time where the sun is setting at a really early time in the day and the nights are really long. We're going to be there. And a lot of the times we don't choose to be in the darkness. Sometimes life will throw us there, whether it's an accident or getting fired or going through a divorce, but we'll all end up there at some point. So the key question is, how do you get through suffering in winter? You know, how do we get through winter? Well, we've adapted as humans. We have clothes, we have jackets. I'm bald, so I have to wear a toque from the time middle of September comes around. but how do you get through it? And then the third question that I realized there was a pattern in my writing is, how do you learn to accept joy out of suffering? That was a huge stumbling block for me. I bet you that was a solid 15 years of, this story just pops in my head. Yes, my mom passed away, but that led me on such an incredible journey of helping others.
Interesting.
But that brought accolades, that brought recognition, that brought awards. And I really had a difficult time accepting that. I had a difficult time accepting the joy out of suffering, accepting the positive out of the negative. And I hear this so often, people that have gone through suffering, right? They'll say, I lost everything. I lost my job. I lost my spouse. But here I'm living my purpose. I'm working in my dream job, and I've got the partner of my dreams that I never thought I would deserve. And if you do not learn to accept joy out of the pain, out of the suffering, the universe has this incredible ability of sending us back to the beginning. And I'm a firm believer that we are put here on this earth to learn a lesson, and we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again until we learn the lesson. And when we learn the lesson, we're then going to get tested on our learning, much like in school, writing an exam, because the fourth element of change in my perception is, how do you mature and serve? Because if you did not learn anything from going through the shit pile, what was the point?
Exactly.
And if you cannot go through the pain and help someone else, what was the point of going through that? And so that's really where I am right now. And I love working with individuals and hearing them tell me, they're on the brink of losing it all. They're got diagnosed with cancer. The bank is going to foreclose on their house, because in my head, all I'm thinking is, I am so excited for you. I am so excited to see what you are going to create out of this disaster. Now, most people don't want to hear that, but that's the reality. We spend so much time on earth with our fellow humans celebrating the successes, where we try and avoid talking about the failures. But man, the lessons that were learned in the failures is what lead to every single person's success.
And, I'm so glad that you got us to this point, because that's really what Avoid the Maze is. We're not going to be able to avoid all those stumbling blocks, but what we can avoid is going deeper. Because if we learn how that's where that block is, to get around, I'm going to have to either get around it, climb over it, or I'm going to have to chisel away at it until it's gone. And I agree with you. We aren't taught as we're growing up, whether it be by our parents, in our churches or synagogues. Nobody tells us that it's okay to fail. Nobody tells us that life isn't going to be perfect. And I remember back in my high school days, I decided to join the debate club. And the first debate that I was in, we really won, but we lost. And the reason we lost was the other team just had more finesse than we did. We had all the right comments, everything was there. We did better research. And afterwards, I went up to my coach and I said, it's not fair. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, welcome to the real world. Life is not fair. Now, what did you just learn? And I looked at him and I said, I learned that they cheated. He said, no, they didn't. He explained to me that they didn't have to have the information. because it was the way they presented themselves. And it took me a long time to understand that. And it was like, okay, now I've got to learn how to make those changes, how I can tell my truth, but be seen in a way that I can influence. So change is difficult. It doesn't happen overnight. So what do you tell your clients that come to you and know that they need to make a change, but you can't give them that timeline as to, oh, I promise you, January 2nd, life will be better?
Well, and it's interesting. So before answering that specifically, I want to circle back to something you said when you were discussing your experience on that first debate team, and you said that no religion teaches us, or we don't learn it in any church or any synagogue. And the really interesting thing about that statement is, while it's true, the humans that are in charge of the churches and the synagogues don't necessarily preach on the topic of change. Anyone that would take the time to read any spiritual text through time, regardless of the writing, every single spiritual text through time are all written by real people going through real times, having real experiences at a real moment in history. And every single spiritual text is all about going through suffering, finding joy, and then spreading the news as a result. And I was born Roman Catholic, born and raised, and like all good Catholics, I fell away from the church. And so I don't identify as being Catholic or really even Christian, because I find the balance in every single religion we have. And that's all it really truly is religion. And the buildings, the churches, the synagogues, they're all organizations, and they're all, in essences, their own businesses. So they're going to promote a message that sells the sizzle, not necessarily the core truth. Right. And I love, when my father was diagnosed with cancer in 2008, I undertook to read the Bible cover to cover.
Okay.
Only because I believed my father was a religious man. And we live 5.5 hour, 6 hour drive from each other. So I made it a point to read the Bible every day for 365 days, because I thought that would give he and I something to talk about on a daily basis. But at the same time, it was a distraction for myself.
Sure.
But what I learned through that process was my father was not a religious man. Religion and the church was his community. He was a spiritual person. He believed that there was a higher power, but he did not identify with the rules and dogmas that went along with the structure. So a lot of my own work with those 4 questions that circumambulate every system of life are actually biblical based, because if you were to read, any of the Old Testament, but especially the New Testament, the 4 Gospels, which are the cornerstone of Catholicism, are actually written in a specific order in history. And they're written with the message of, or in the order of, Matthew, Mark, and the church does Luke and John, but I would reverse it to John and Luke, because chronologically that's how they're written. One is, how do you prepare for change in Matthew? Mark is, how do you go through suffering? It is the dark text of the Bible. John is all about finding the joy, and Luke is all about going and serving. And it's that message that even just me talk, I get shivers, because every spiritual writer, and I don't care if it's Christian based. You can go Lao Tzu. You can go. It's interesting. I'm actually just reading a book right now that it was Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and it's
Wow.
Finding Joy is the title of the book. I read most of it on the beach, and it was a fascinating read. And there is a perfect example where you've got the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, two very opposite religions, but they both speak the same message. And they're actually both very vocal against the structure. But I've also said that, if Jesus were alive today, he'd be horrified to see what was done in his name. Because the Jesus story, he came to destroy religion. He really went against the Pharisees, and he went against the money changers, and he was about destroying the system. And then 400 years after, his death in the story, they made a religion out of him. And I just find that this is the funniest thing ever. So to answer your question, when people come to me, usually they come to me and they are, as I said earlier, in the gutters of life. They have lost hope. They have lost motivation. They just do not see any possible way that they can go forward. And the number one thing that I do, I don't tell them it's going to be okay, because I don't know that. Right?
Right.
You might be diagnosed with cancer and you might die. If cancer doesn't get you, something else will, because death is inevitable.
Right.
But I will say, and I stick with the grand purpose, that there is joy out of this moment if you can find the stillness, if you can find that centering moment and get out of your own head. So for individuals, about 6 years ago now, I created a 90-day online journey that I give away for free for anyone that expresses a desire that they want me to work with them, to coach them. And the whole purpose of the 90 days is to gain control over your thoughts, gain control over your mind, but mostly to outwit fear, to quiet that little voice in the head that says, I'm going to be a failure. I am a failure. I'm no good. I don't belong on this earth. Because once we can understand how fear has been imprinted upon us for thousands of years, and we're seeing it, especially in the last 2 years,
Right.
with this thing that seems to have overtaken us. When fear controls us, we don't have the ability to make any logical, fact-based decisions, because we are constantly worried. We're constantly focused on the unknowns, the what ifs. And what I usually see, and what I'm seeing a lot now, is so many people are either angry about the past or scared of the future.
Absolutely.
And no matter what of those angles you're at, you're not living now. So if you're not living now, there's no way you're going to get through the pain. There's no way you're going to get through the suffering. And there's so much to be gleaned from traditional medicine, right? Someone I know about 1.5 years ago was in a horrible car accident, and they induced him into a coma because they needed his body to, in essence, shut down so that his body could heal itself. But really, they just needed his mind to shut
Right.
off so that the body could do the work. And so I use a lot of these stories that it's that reminder we're all connected. We are, I love Eckhart Tolle has an analogy of, we are all just waves that the ocean is doing. And a wave comes, a wave goes, but the ocean remains. But that's very difficult in this Western society we live in to accept that we are impermanent, that we are just a speck of dust on this massive boulder that's been around for trillions of years, hurtling through space at 200,000 miles an hour. And yet we somehow think we can control the outcome.
You know, what I'm hearing you say takes me back about 5 years ago. My mother was living on her own in an independent living apartment, doing well. And then one morning we get a phone call. We were told she had a stroke. And our first reaction was, this can't be happening. We just talked to her. She sounded great. But my mother was also 96 and a half years old. So, you know, logically, we knew that, like you said, we all leave this earth at some time. But I always felt that my mother and I had this love-hate relationship. And I went up to stay with her in Michigan. And for 2.5 months, I was part of her care team. And I changed. And I changed because I realized that my mother had always loved me. It was the voices in my head wanting to have a Hallmark family that told me that it was a love-hate. And when I realized that, I sort of pledged myself to doing what I'm doing now. And that is, don't wait till it's too late. And luckily, I had 2.5 months where my mother and I had great conversations, learned things that I never would have asked her about. And those are the things that propelled me to realize that we are all alike. I thought my mother was superior to me. My mother, other than having the stroke and a couple colds in 96 and a half years, I never saw my mother ill. And I was jealous of that. It was like, how come you don't get the flu? I do. How come I have migraines? You don't have migraines. How come I have female problems? You didn't. Look at you. You are this perfect mold of a person. But the reality of it is she had her own issues. And she taught us in some way how to get through the dark days. I didn't know what she taught me until I spent that time with her, until I started doing what I'm doing now. So I have learned not to be envious of my neighbor, because my neighbor is going through something as well. Maybe not as heavy as my problems, maybe worse. But if we can communicate and understand that we're all the same, what a beautiful world we really would be living in.
You know, and it is so true on that one element. And this is one of the things that I hold that gives me that hopeful power for humanity, is everything, all of civilization has been moving forward through time. Yes, there have been stumbling blocks. There have been, sometimes where it's one step forward, 18 steps back, but everything is moving forward. And all art, whether it's music or painting or sculpture or writing or what you and I are doing, this is art. And this is that natural form of expression that, there will be somebody who watches this, and it might not be now, it might be 40 years down the road, that is going through a challenge, that they'll find some valuable piece in this and it'll resonate with them. And that's, a song that could be written 50 years ago by someone who's probably now dead, that you've never met, that you had no idea. Their words can strike you so deeply to the core. And that's that reminder that there is a higher energy that regardless of what someone calls it, it is that unifying force that's pushing us all forward. And the story you shared about your mom before this interview, listening to some of your previous interviews, I expected that there was a universal nudge that pushed you in this direction, because something similar happened to me in 2015, where 5 years after my father had passed away, or was it 2000? Anyway, it doesn't matter the year. When my dad died, I was blogging, I was writing constantly, and there was a piece I wrote that got picked up by a large organization, and it was read almost 20 million times. And that sat with me for a while. And then in 2015, I decided there was still this ache deep inside of me that I was missing my parents deeply. My mom had been gone 10 years at that point, my father 5 years. And I decided that I was going to travel the world electronically and interview people about who inspired them, who were their heroes, who really shaped their lives. And it was such an incredible journey, and the stories I collected I still cherish to this day. And I put them all in a book, and right before I was going to the publisher, I decided to interview two more people, two people that knew my father. And I heard stories that I didn't even know about. And so although I set out on a project to help other people shine a light on their heroes, what ended up happening is I ended up bridging a gap between father and son 5 years after he had passed away. And it was such to me, a spiritual experience, because again, it was that, where did that idea come from? I don't know where it came from. It just came from, the divine, the energy around that said, Kevin, you have to do this. Similar to that old Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And I think that's one of those, again, the individuals I work with that are going through massive change. It is so difficult to encourage people to get out of their way. But once they do, and they surrender, and they allow. And so in 2015, I released that book. It became a bestseller. I went on a speaking tour, and it was the fall of 2015. It was the third week of September, right at the fall equinox. I threw my back out, and I was helping a friend move a barbecue, and I was stuck in bed for days. And my business partner at the time, texting, and I'm like, I can't get out of bed. She said, Kevin, if you don't go to your doctor, I'm going to come to your condo and drag you by your feet to your doctor. Now, my doctor's office is literally a block away.
Okay.
And I did. And that was the right before Canadian Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is in October. And the 4 or 5 days after that initial doctor's appointment, I was in an oncologist's office where he diagnosed me with cancer. And I remember in that moment just looking up and saying, I get it. And from that moment on, life has been, yes, there's been challenges. Yes, there's been obstacles, but everything has been smooth, because I've learned to surrender to what is. I've learned to surrender to the moment. And even in this past weekend, Saturday, I flew home from Cuba. And the day before my flight, I was on the beach reading that book I referenced. And I was reading a passage that was about anger and anxiety. And it talked about Desmond Tutu was driving and he got cut off. And then the interview was talking about how he responded in the vehicle. And he talked about, you have no idea what that person is going through. They could be off to the hospital. They could be racing because their child is sick at home. And it's okay to understand that there's going to be those instant feelings of anger, but it's what you do with that afterwards is what truly counts. So I flew back into Toronto on Saturday. Flight landed. My partner's suitcase was first off the plane. And 90 minutes later, we're still standing there at the carousel, and it stops, and the airline representative comes, and as I see her walking towards me, I just start laughing because I couldn't imagine how much more perfectly timed that experience was when 24 hours earlier I read the passage and the lesson, and I posted it on my social media, I guess on Sunday, because I'm still chuckling about it. I have no control over my luggage. I can't do anything about it. It's gone. And the airline attendant, she was so relieved at how I handled it with humor and acceptance and grace. She gave me a high five, and the bag showed up. It showed up 48, 60 hours later. But we're always tested. We're always given these obstacles in our life. And what I love doing with individuals, and the number one way I can help people, is not by necessarily my experience or what I've gone through or my words, but it's holding up that mirror. It's that there's a 65, 70-year-old woman that I know, and we had lunch a while ago, and she talked to me about what her daughter is going through with her partner and her daughter, or her granddaughter. And all I had to do was, so-and-so, tell me about the relationship you had with your mom and your mom's marriage. Tell me about that. And it was a release for her, because it was that connection that whatever we don't deal with in this life, we pass on to the next generation. And so when I hear you talk about, the experience you had with your mom in her final time, what a gift you had.
Oh, absolutely.
In time, because just in that space that your mom created for you, you were able to go on a healing journey and now be in a position to help countless other people. And my famous saying, and I kind of go by, if I don't remember who said it, if I said it enough times, I can claim it as my own. But someone famous and probably dead once said, you can cut open an apple and count the seeds, but you can never count the apples produced from those seeds. And that has always stuck with me, because that was a motto my father lived, right? He was youngest of farming family. He was fat growing up. He was teased. He discovered alcohol at a very young age. He went on his own journey, and his own journey 3 years before I was born. He sobered up, but he only sobered up because he almost killed my mother. And he sobered up 3 years later, I was born. But then 3 years after that, he was crushed by an elevator. And he was disabled for the entire time I knew him. Wow. But he used his disability to help others, because he knew that in order for him to find value, in order for him to stay connected, he needed to have the conversations with others. He needed to listen to others. But at the same time, and when I learned about the mirror, his famous quote, and I still use this, and I have so many uses for this quote in today's day and age. If someone were to, and I think this is a question earlier, or a comment earlier, what happens with humanity is, and I see this with men a lot, I see this with women a lot, I see it on both sides. If they go through a nasty divorce, they tend to spend their time with people who have gone through a similar experience. but not necessarily learned and vibrated up as a result of it, right? They've chosen that group where it's vibrated down. The world is against me, that everyone is out to get me. Well, if that is your energy sphere, it's never going to get better. And so whenever my father, in Alcoholics, he was a prolific speaker, a very sought after speaker in Alcoholics. He's volunteered within the psych ward at the Ottawa General Hospital, and people would always come to him for help and for advice. And when he passed away, the number one comment we always heard is, "Your father helped me move." He was always there. He was always at the other end of the phone. But if someone were getting in their pity party, he would say, the number one thing he would say to them is, sympathy in the dictionary is between shit and syphilis. And it usually stunned people.
Right.
But once they realized what he was trying to say, it was very profound. And I think that's a big element to going through change, is you're not looking for sympathy. You're not looking for someone to dive into the deep end with you. You're looking for someone to sit on the shoreline, sit on the side of the pool, and be there with a towel when you get out of the water.
Right.
But we're taught in this world of self-entitlement and ego-driven media that we think everyone should get in the proverbial shit pile with us.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up that quote, because my father and my oldest brother have repeated that numerous times. I remember probably about 10, maybe 12 years ago, it was holiday time, and we couldn't go home to family. I was feeling very sorry for myself. I had my husband, my youngest son, but it didn't feel like holiday. And I got on Facebook and I poured my heart out. Oh, woe is me. And my older brother saw it, and he called me and he said, "Take that down right now. You're better than that." And I argued with him. No, I'm depressed. It's just the three of us. It doesn't feel like a holiday. And he said, "What does a holiday feel like?" And I took him back almost 20 years. And he goes, "That was 20 years ago. Things have changed. The world has evolved. You are not the same person you were 20 years ago." And he told me to hang up the phone and find something to be happy about. And I hung up the phone and I laid there crying. And then I was like, what a waste of time. I have a wonderful husband. I have a wonderful son. My other son was well and working and doing what he wanted to do. I have something to be happy for. I went into the bathroom, I washed my face, put on some makeup, came downstairs. My husband and son looked at me and said, "What happened?" I said, "I found something to be happy about." And that's what I do every day. And that's what we try to share in these podcasts. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a consultant of any kind. I'm just an everyday person who has found that whether you like change or not, it's going to happen. So make the best of it. So how can our listeners find you?
My website, and again, thank you very much at the outset of this interview for the great testimonial to that. It's Kevin T Cahill.com. The T is my middle name. Stands for Thomas. My father's first name is Thomas. And throughout my entire growing up, I never wanted to be anything like my father until he passed away. And I went on my own journey to realize I'm exactly like my father. And so a lot of marketing people will comment, it's the T, not everyone's going to remember it. It's not catchy. I'm like, but it's symbolic for myself. And it's interesting because I gave a speech a number of years ago, and I titled it The Morse Code of Life. And I related it to, at the early 1900s, there was this great train tragedy in Halifax Harbor, Nova Scotia, on the east coast of Canada, and talked about how, the Morse code operator was responsible. He ended up dying as a result, but he was responsible for saving thousands of lives. And I tied that talk into the famous poem by Linda Ellis, The Dash, called The Dash. And if you don't know the poem, listeners yourself, it's such an amazing, it talks about, on our tombstone, we've got the day we're born and the day we die, but it's that dash between the two numbers that's most important. And when I was researching about the Morse code and such, I realized that the letter T in Morse code is just a dash. And so Kevin T Cahill is my website. I'll be honest, ever since COVID started almost 2 years ago, I've been quiet. I've gone into, the Hebrew word is menuha, a bit of a rest, recalibration, because I find myself needing to protect my own space.
Sure.
In this this haze we're living in, where we're being bombarded with the fire hose of negative information on a constant basis. So when individuals find me, I'm always grateful and happy to have conversations and to work. But I haven't been actively blogging on my website, but I do have social media. I'm there on Facebook and LinkedIn. Those are the two that I've focused on. The links are all on my website. It's easy to find me, but I love just having conversations. I love these organic conversations where you just don't know where they're going to go.
Absolutely.
But you can always guarantee that in a span of 30 or 45 minutes, you're going to learn something about someone else. And in learning that about someone else, you're also going to learn something about yourself.
Well, I know every day I learn something new about myself. I'm not as good as letting those little things not irritate me. And I try very, very hard just to enjoy life one step at a time. So we welcome our listeners to check Kevin out. And if you have an interesting topic that you'd like to share, and maybe share it with Kevin, we can have Kevin back on Avoid the Maze and, have one of those conversations that will take us someplace interesting and maybe unclog our minds. So thank you very much, Kevin. Hope you have a very happy holiday season. And I think you'll get used to the cold weather up in Canada. I think you're a little colder than we are here in Cleveland, but that's not for long. We will catch up with you.
Yes, it's been an absolute honor having this conversation with you, and I wish all the best for yourself as well.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.
You too. Bye now.